The staff entrance is downstairs. Richard Whitmore did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The white billionaire stood beneath a chandelier blazing over the Grand Marlowe ballroom, one hand resting beside a crystal champagne glass, his silver cufflinks catching every camera flash. Across from him, Danielle Brooks went perfectly still. She was the only black woman near the velvet rope, dressed in a simple black evening gown, holding a cream invitation between two fingers. Around them, conversations thinned into whispers. A waiter slowed. A photographer lowered his camera. Danielle looked at Richard, then passed him toward the stage, where a large object remained hidden beneath black fabric. She knew what was under it. Richard clearly did not. "I am not staff," she said. His eyes traveled over her dress, her shoes, then back to her face. A small smile formed. "Then you are even more lost than I thought." Someone behind him laughed. Danielle felt heat climb beneath her collar, but her hand stayed steady. "I was invited." Everyone says that when they reach the wrong side of the rope. Richard flicked two fingers toward security. The gesture was casual, almost bored. That hurt more than anger would have. Two guards started across the marble floor, their footsteps cutting through the soft jazz. Danielle could feel dozens of eyes following them. No one asked to see her invitation. No one asked her name. Richard had looked at her for 3 seconds and decided the entire story. "Mr. Whitmore." Danielle's voice stopped him as he turned away. He glanced back. "You might want to know who you are removing first." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Irritation. "I know enough." Danielle almost smiled. Almost. Then a sharp crash exploded behind them. Crystal struck marble. A young waitress stood frozen beside an overturned tray, her face drained of color. "My bracelet!" a woman screamed from Richard's table. Chairs scraped backward. A diamond bracelet worth more than most people in the room earned in a year had vanished. The ballroom changed instantly. Music stopped. Security turned. Richard's attention snapped toward the waitress. "Nobody leaves." Danielle watched the young woman's hands begin to tremble. "I did not take anything," she whispered. Richard stepped closer. "Then empty your pockets." The humiliation in the girl's face was immediate. Danielle knew that look. She had been wearing it herself 30 seconds earlier. One guard reached for the waitress's apron. "Wait!" Danielle's voice cut through the room. Richard turned slowly. "You are still here?" "She did not take it." A murmur rolled through the guests. Richard gave a dry laugh. "And now you are investigating?" Danielle ignored him. Her eyes moved across the table. White linen, overturned champagne, a chair pushed back too quickly. Something had flashed when the cloth shifted. She stepped toward it. A guard blocked her. "Do not touch anything." "Then look underneath." Nobody moved. Richard's jaw tightened. "Escort her out." Danielle stared at the tablecloth. There it was again, barely visible beneath the folds, one hard spark of white light. "Before you do," she said quietly, "you should ask why your missing diamond is hanging 6 inches from your hand." Silence swallowed the ballroom. Richard looked down. The waitress stopped breathing. Danielle reached toward the linen, but before her fingers touched it, a woman in a headset burst through the ballroom doors, scanning the crowd with panic in her eyes. "Where is Dr. Brooks?" she demanded. Richard barely noticed her. Danielle did. And for the first time that night, the invitation in her hand began to unfold. The woman in the headset stopped cold when she saw Danielle. "Dr. Brooks?" Richard's eyes flicked from her to Danielle, but before the question could form, Danielle pointed beneath the white linen. "The bracelet." A security guard lifted the cloth. Diamonds flashed under the chandelier, caught on a tiny metal hook beneath the table exactly where Danielle had said. The young waitress released a shaking breath. Around them, guests stared at Richard, waiting. He could have apologized. Instead, his face hardened. "That proves where it was," he said. "Not how it got there." Danielle's expression changed. Just slightly. You think I put it there? I think people do strange things when they want attention. The words landed harder than his first insult. The waitress stepped forward. Sir, she was helping me. Richard barely looked at her. Emily, stay out of this. Danielle glanced at the girl's name tag. Emily Carter. 20-something, pale with embarrassment, clutching her apron as if her job depended on keeping her hands still. No, Danielle said. She should speak. Richard's gaze sharpened. This is my event. Then act like the host. The room went silent again. A champagne refrigerator hummed behind the bar. Somewhere beyond the service doors, metal carts rattled over concrete as kitchen workers prepared the next course, unaware that the ballroom had become a courtroom without a judge. Richard stepped closer. You walk into a private gala, interfere with security, embarrass one of my guests, and now you lecture me? Danielle slowly opened her cream invitation another inch. Richard never looked down. I prevented you from humiliating an innocent employee. Security. The two guards moved in. Emily's eyes widened. Mr. Whitmore, please. Enough. His voice cracked across the marble. Danielle folded the invitation again. That small motion caught the event coordinator's attention. She hurried closer, but a cluster of guests blocked her path. Dr. Brooks, she called again. Richard heard the name this time. His brow tightened. Who is she looking for? Danielle met his eyes. For one suspended second, she considered answering. Then Richard's phone vibrated against the table. He checked the screen. Whatever he saw made his mouth tighten. Take her outside. One guard gestured toward the doors. Danielle walked without resistance. That seemed to disturb the room more than a protest would have. Her heels clicked across the marble, each step passing another table of donors who suddenly found their glasses fascinating. Emily followed 3 steps before her manager caught her arm. Do not, he whispered. Danielle heard him. She kept walking. Behind her, Richard exhaled and straightened his jacket as if the problem had been removed. Then Emily did something nobody expected. She pulled off her server badge. Her name is Danielle Brooks, she said. Richard turned. What? Emily's voice shook, but grew louder. I saw her invitation when I checked her coat. The coordinator finally pushed through the crowd. Her face had gone white. Where did she go? Richard pointed toward the doors, irritation returning. We removed a disruptive guest. The coordinator stared at him. You removed her? The ballroom seemed to shrink around those words. Richard's confidence flickered. Who exactly is Dr. Brooks? The coordinator looked toward the stage, where the black covering began to rise with a mechanical whir. Beneath it, a massive portrait slowly appeared under the spotlights. Richard watched the face emerge. First the black evening gown. Then the calm eyes. Then the name printed beneath it in gold. His champagne glass slipped slightly between his fingers. Outside, Danielle stepped beneath the hotel awning as cold rain swept across Michigan Avenue. She finally opened the invitation completely. Inside, embossed in gold, were the words Richard had never bothered to read. Keynote honoree, Dr. Danielle Brooks. Then the ballroom doors opened behind her, and someone shouted. Dr. Brooks, wait. Mr. Whitmore just found out who you are. Danielle did not turn around. Not yet. Dr. Brooks, wait. The coordinator's voice chased Danielle into the rain, but she kept walking until another voice stopped her. Let her go. Richard Whitmore stood beneath the hotel awning, his face rigid beneath the cold white entrance lights. Behind him, guests crowded the glass doors. Several phones were already raised, tiny red recording lights glowing in the dark. Richard looked at Danielle's open invitation, then at her face. So you are the keynote speaker? That is what the invitation says. Rain hissed against the pavement. A black sedan idled at the curb, its engine vibrating through the wet concrete beneath Danielle's heels. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then you understand how damaging this could become. Danielle stared at him. Damaging for whom? His jaw tightened. For everyone. Emily was accused of stealing. I was accused of planting evidence. Which part concerns you? Richard glanced toward the phones behind the glass. That was answer enough. Come inside, he said. We will handle this privately. Danielle almost laughed, but there was no humor left in her. You made it public. Richard's expression cooled. Do not turn a misunderstanding into something it was not. Danielle felt the wet invitation soften between her fingers. You never asked my name. Silence. You never checked my invitation. You looked at me and decided where I belong. Richard leaned closer. Be careful. 2 words. Quiet. Controlled. Danielle heard exactly what lid beneath them. Is that advice? She asked. Or another assumption? A camera shutter clicked behind Richard. His eyes flicked toward the sound. For the first time that evening, Danielle saw uncertainty break through his confidence. Then Emily appeared at the doors. She had removed her apron. Her manager followed, whispering desperately for her to return inside. Emily ignored him. Dr. Brooks. Danielle turned. Emily swallowed hard. There is something you need to know. Richard immediately stepped between them. Not now. Emily froze. Danielle did not. Let her speak. This is still my event. And she still has a voice. Richard's neck flushed. The coordinator hurried outside, heels striking stone. We have 400 people waiting. The live stream begins in 6 minutes. Richard seized on it. Exactly. Danielle, you have a responsibility to those people. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Minutes earlier she had been an intruder. Now she was useful, and suddenly he knew her first name. Interesting, she said. Richard understood. I am offering you a way to move forward. No. You are offering yourself a way out. Behind the doors, more guests had gathered. The ballroom lights dimmed, turning the glass into a dark mirror filled with watching faces. Then Emily stepped around Richard. Her hands were trembling. The bracelet was not the first thing. Richard went still. Danielle noticed. What does that mean? Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black object no larger than a matchbook. A wireless microphone transmitter. This was clipped under the VIP table for the live stream. Richard's face changed. Give me that. Emily pulled her hand back. It was already recording. The rain suddenly seemed louder. Danielle looked from Emily to Richard. Recording what? Emily's eyes filled with fear. Everything near that table. Richard moved forward. You have no authority to keep event equipment. Neither do you, the coordinator said unexpectedly. Richard turned sharply. She held up her phone. The production company owns it. Another reversal. Another door closing. Danielle's pulse remained steady, but her fingers tightened around the invitation. Emily looked directly at her. Dr. Brooks, when Mr. Whitmore accused you, the microphone was live. Richard's face strained. Turn it off. Nobody moved. Now. Emily shook her head. That is the problem. She looked toward the ballroom, where the enormous screens had just flickered from Danielle's portrait to the live stream countdown. 5, 4, 3. Richard stared through the glass as the speakers inside crackled alive. Then his own recorded voice rolled across the ballroom, clear enough for every donor, employee, camera, and phone to hear. Everyone says that when they reach the wrong side of the rope. Danielle watched hundreds of faces turn toward him. But Emily was not looking at Richard. She was staring at the transmitter, horrified. That is not the worst thing it recorded, she whispered. That is not the worst thing it recorded. Emily's whisper barely escaped her lips before Richard lunged for the control tablet. Kill the audio. The technician hesitated. Across the ballroom, hundreds of faces glowed beneath cold blue stage lights, while phone cameras rose one after another like tiny red eyes. Then another recording played through the speakers. Richard's voice. Colder this time. That woman does not belong near my donors. The room broke into shocked whispers. Danielle stood beneath the awning, rainwater cooling the heat in her palms. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, something in the recording bothered her. A second voice had been buried beneath Richard's words. Quiet. Male. Nervous. Sir, we should move the pledge report before she sees it. Danielle's eyes sharpened. Play that again. Richard turned toward her. Absolutely not. Why? Because this circus ends now. He pushed through the doors, expensive shoes striking marble hard enough to echo. Danielle followed, with Emily and the coordinator close behind. The ballroom air felt warmer than outside, thick with perfume, champagne, and panic. Richard reached the production console. Shut everything down. Do not, Danielle said. He spun around. You are a guest here. Danielle unfolded her invitation completely. Gold lettering caught the stage light. 5 minutes ago, I was an intruder. Pick one. Several guests murmured. Richard's face reddened. You have no idea what you are interfering with. Danielle looked toward the giant screens. The live stream timer had disappeared, replaced by a fundraising dashboard showing tonight's pledges. $12.8 million. Numbers rolled beside donor names. Danielle stared. Something was wrong. She moved closer. Who prepared that total? Richard laughed once, without humor. Now you are auditing my foundation? Answer her, said a voice from the front table. Richard's smile vanished. An older board member had stood up. Danielle studied the screen again. Her eyes moved between the pledge total, the matching funds line, and the printed program lying beside an abandoned champagne glass. 12.8 million on screen. 9.6 million in announced pledges. A $3.2 million difference. The matching grant, Danielle said. The coordinator nodded nervously. Whitmore Capital matches tonight's donations. After verified pledges? Yes. Danielle pointed toward the screen. Then why was the match added before verification? Silence. Richard stepped between her and the display. Because these figures are preliminary. That is not what your donor disclosure says. He froze. Danielle picked up the program. On the final page, beneath the foundation seal, the terms were printed in small gray text. She read only long enough to confirm what she had seen. The match is triggered after verified donations clear. But this dashboard counts it first, then uses the inflated total to calculate another matching commitment. The board member moved closer. That would double count part of the money. No, Richard snapped. It would not. Danielle looked directly at him. Then show them the ledger. The whispers stopped. Even the refrigeration unit behind the bar seemed suddenly loud. Richard's wrist glistened with sweat beneath his silver watch. You are a civil rights attorney, Dr. Brooks. Not an accountant. Correct. She placed the program down. Which makes it strange that I noticed this before the people you paid to approve it. A few guests lowered their glasses. Others aimed their phones directly at Richard. The power in the room had shifted, not toward Danielle yet, but away from him. Open the ledger, the board member said. Richard did not move. Emily suddenly touched Danielle's arm. There was another conversation. Richard's head snapped toward her. Emily. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. She flinched, but Danielle stepped beside her. What conversation? Emily held up the transmitter. Before you arrived. 2 men were talking about tonight's numbers. Richard's face went completely still. You misunderstood. I did not understand any of it, Emily admitted. But she might. She pressed playback. Static filled the ballroom. Then a man's voice emerged through the speakers. Once Whitmore signs the transfer at 10, the missing 3.2 disappears inside the match. Nobody moved. Danielle slowly turned toward Richard. His confidence was gone. But what she saw was not guilt. It was fear. Richard, she said quietly. Who was speaking? He stared at the floor for several seconds. Then he looked up at her, pale beneath the stage lights. You think I am the one stealing the money? His voice cracked for the first time. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out a sealed envelope, and held it toward Danielle with a trembling hand. I received this 20 minutes before you arrived. Danielle opened it. Inside was a single printed page containing tonight's transfer authorization and one handwritten sentence across the bottom. Sign at 10, or everyone sees what happened to Brooks. Danielle stopped breathing. Richard looked at her. I thought Brooks was a company. Then Danielle saw the photograph clipped behind the page, and the entire ballroom seemed to disappear around her. Danielle stared at the photograph, and the blood seemed to drain from her hands. It showed her entering the Grand Marlowe less than an hour earlier, taken from across Michigan Avenue. A red circle had been drawn around her face. Beneath it were words. She cannot reach the stage. Richard reached for the photograph. Danielle pulled it back. Who knew I was coming? The ballroom went dead silent. Phone cameras kept recording, their tiny lights blinking beneath the chandeliers. Hundreds of people, Richard said. Your name was on the program. My name was. My arrival time was not. That landed differently. Danielle looked toward the donation screen. $12.8 million still glowed above the stage like a promise nobody trusted anymore. Someone needed the transfer signed before my speech. Richard's breathing sharpened. You are making connections that are not there. Then open the ledger. I said no. His voice thundered across the room. Several donors recoiled. Richard saw them. Saw their phones. Saw the board members whispering. His control was collapsing in public, and desperation hardened his face. This woman walks in here, creates chaos, and suddenly everyone treats her like an investigator? Danielle felt every eye swing back toward her. There it was again. Not Dr. Brooks. Not keynote honoree. This woman. Richard, the older board member warned. No. Richard pointed toward Danielle. We know nothing about her involvement. A shocked murmur spread through the ballroom. Emily whispered, You cannot be serious. Richard was. Maybe that photograph is meant to make her look like a target. Danielle's throat tightened. You think I staged this? I think $12 million is at stake. So was Emily's job when you accused her. Richard flinched. Danielle stepped toward the production table. Security shifted with her. For one brutal second, she stood alone between men in dark suits, wealthy donors, and a billionaire trying to turn suspicion into a weapon. Then she noticed something on the dashboard. A small gray icon pulsed beside the transfer total. Once. Twice. Do not touch that console, Richard said. Danielle leaned closer. The transfer is not waiting for 10. What? It is already queued. The technician looked over. That is impossible. Danielle pointed. Then why is the authorization token active? He stared at the screen. His face changed. She is right. A sharp electronic tone sounded from the console. 9 minutes remaining. Richard pushed forward. Cancel it. The technician typed rapidly. Nothing happened. It is locked. 8 minutes 52 seconds. The room erupted. Donors stood. Chairs scraped marble. Investors demanded answers while camera shutters snapped in bursts. Richard grabbed the edge of the table, sweat shining along his wrist. Use the administrator account. I am trying. Danielle looked at the transfer authorization again. Then at the matching calculation. Then at the audio transcript still frozen on another monitor. Something clicked. They do not need your signature. Richard stared at her. The recording said they did. They needed everyone to believe they did. She turned to the coordinator. Who has access to the pledge verification system? Finance, production, executive staff. And the outside accounting team? The coordinator hesitated. Yes. Danielle's eyes moved across the ballroom. One chair at Richard's table was empty. A half-full glass remained beside a silver laptop. Who was sitting there? Nobody answered. Richard looked toward the chair, and whatever anger remained in him suddenly disappeared. Calvin Price. The older board member went pale. Your chief financial officer? Richard nodded. Danielle's eyes dropped to the floor. A thin black cable ran from the abandoned laptop beneath the tablecloth toward the production console. Nobody touched that laptop. Richard looked at her. This time there was no contempt in his face. Only fear. The countdown reached 7 minutes. Danielle crouched without touching anything and followed the cable with her eyes. It did not terminate at the console. It disappeared through a service panel toward the ballroom's lower level. Where does that go? She asked. The technician swallowed. Parking garage control room. Richard immediately pulled out his phone and called Calvin. From somewhere beneath their feet, faint through the marble and music equipment, a phone began ringing. Everyone heard it. Richard slowly lowered his own phone. Danielle looked toward the service elevator. The indicator above it began climbing. Garage level. Basement. Lobby. Emily moved closer to Danielle. The elevator motor groaned behind the wall. Richard whispered, Calvin left 20 minutes ago. The bell chimed. The doors opened. No one was inside. Just a silver briefcase on the floor, Richard's missing foundation access card resting on top. Then the ballroom speakers crackled, and Calvin Price's voice filled the room. Dr. Brooks, if you are hearing this, you figured it out too soon. Dr. Brooks, if you are hearing this, you figured it out too soon. Calvin's recorded voice faded into static, and for several seconds nobody moved. The ballroom that had been exploding with accusations became unnaturally still. Even the ventilation seemed quieter. Danielle stared at the silver briefcase inside the empty elevator. Nobody touch it. Richard looked at her. An hour earlier, he would have dismissed the order. Now he obeyed without speaking. Danielle stepped closer, stopping several feet from the elevator. Cold ceiling light slid across the metal case. The foundation access card on top reflected a thin blue line. Richard's phone vibrated in his palm. He ignored it. 6 minutes, the technician whispered. The transfer countdown continued silently on the giant screen. Danielle looked at the briefcase, then at the service panel beside the elevator. Calvin wanted us looking at this. Richard frowned. Why? Because everyone in this room is looking here instead of where the money is actually moving. A murmur passed through the donors. Danielle turned toward the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes followed her now, but they were different eyes. Nobody was looking at her dress. Nobody was wondering whether she belonged. They were waiting for her to see what they could not. Danielle walked back toward the abandoned laptop. Her heels struck the marble slowly. Click. 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 Richard followed several feet behind, his confidence replaced by something heavier. You knew something was wrong before tonight, Danielle said. He stopped. What? She lifted the threatening note. You received this before I arrived, yet you continued the gala. Richard's mouth tightened. 400 guests. Investors. Press. $12 million in pledges. What was I supposed to do? Danielle looked at him. Tell the truth. He glanced away. That movement was small, but the entire front table saw it. There is more, she said. Richard's breathing changed. Danielle. It was the first time he had spoken her name without contempt. What are you not telling us? He remained silent. The countdown reached 5 minutes. Somewhere below, the garage ventilation fans powered down one by one, their mechanical drone falling away until the building seemed to hold its breath. Richard finally spoke. Calvin warned me 3 weeks ago that someone was questioning the foundation. Who? I did not know. Danielle's eyes moved to the covered program beside his seat. You did. Richard stared at her. She opened the program to her biography. A sentence near the bottom mentioned an investigation she had led 18 months earlier into discriminatory grant practices at several private foundations. Richard read it. His face slowly emptied. You were the attorney. Danielle said nothing. The Brooks report, he whispered. The older board member stood abruptly. That investigation cost 3 foundations their federal partnerships. Richard looked at Danielle as if seeing her for the first time. Not as staff. Not as an unwanted guest. Not even as the keynote speaker. As the person Calvin Price had apparently been afraid would recognize the pattern. Danielle's voice remained calm. I was invited tonight because your board asked me to speak about accountability in charitable institutions. The coordinator nodded. Calvin personally approved the invitation list. Richard turned toward her. He invited Danielle? Yes. That made no sense. Danielle felt it immediately. If Calvin feared her, why bring her into the building? Her eyes returned to the transfer screen. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. He did not invite me by mistake. She looked at the inflated pledge total. Then at Richard's access card. Then at the photograph of herself entering the hotel. The truth began forming, cold and precise. He needed me here. Richard stepped closer. For what? Danielle's phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. She opened it. A photograph filled the screen. It showed Richard standing over her near the velvet rope earlier that evening, his hand raised toward security. Time-stamped. Perfectly framed. Beneath it was a draft headline already prepared for publication. Whitmore Foundation removes black civil rights attorney minutes before millions vanish. Danielle slowly lifted her eyes. Richard saw the screen and went pale. He was framing me, Danielle said. No. Her voice dropped. He was framing both of us. The room went silent again. Richard sank into a chair, the realization finally breaking through everything pride had protected. His public humiliation of Danielle had not merely exposed his prejudice. Calvin had counted on it. He had known exactly how Richard would react when a black woman he did not recognize approached the VIP section. Danielle stared at him. Richard could not meet her eyes. He knew me better than I knew myself, he whispered. For the first time, there was no billionaire in his voice. Only shame. The countdown reached 3 minutes. Then Danielle noticed one detail in the photograph that made her heart stop. In the mirrored wall behind Richard, barely visible between 2 guests, Calvin Price was standing inside the ballroom. Watching them. Danielle enlarged the image. Calvin was not alone. Beside him stood the older board member who had been demanding the ledger all night. Danielle slowly lowered the phone. The man noticed her staring. His face did not change. But his hand slipped quietly into his jacket. Danielle looked at Richard. Do not turn around. Richard froze. Why? Danielle kept her eyes on the reflection in the dark glass. Because Calvin was never working alone. Do not turn around. Danielle kept her eyes on the mirrored wall as the countdown dropped below 3 minutes. Richard sat rigid beneath the cold stage lights, his breathing suddenly louder than the whispers around him. Across the ballroom, the older board member, Martin Caldwell, slipped his hand deeper inside his jacket. What do you see? Richard whispered. The man who kept demanding your ledger. Danielle raised her phone as if reading the message again. He was standing beside Calvin when that photograph was taken. Richard's face tightened. Martin has been on my board for 17 years. Then he knows exactly how you react under pressure. The words hit harder than an accusation. Richard looked down. Around them, phone cameras continued recording, their screens glowing above white tablecloths and untouched champagne. 2 minutes, 38 seconds. Danielle turned toward the technician. Can you freeze the transfer? The administrator lock overrides me. Do not fight the lock. He stared at her. What? Danielle pointed toward the inflated pledge total. The transfer depends on a verified matching amount. Remove the false match from the verification chain. The technician blinked. Then his hands flew across the keyboard. Martin stepped forward. You cannot alter foundation records during a live event. Danielle finally looked at him. Calmly. I am not asking him to alter anything. She held up the printed donor disclosure. I am asking him to enforce your own rules. Silence. The technician stopped typing. She is right. Martin's expression flickered. The match cannot transfer unless the original pledge is clear. Danielle nodded toward the screen. Separate verified donations from projected donations. The numbers began changing. 12.8 million became 11.4. Then 10.1. Guests gasped as the total continued falling. 9.7. 9.6. The false 3.2 million vanished from the calculation. The countdown froze at 1 minute, 43 seconds. Then the transfer status turned red. Rejected, insufficient verified funds. For 1 second, nobody understood. Then the ballroom erupted. Not applause. Shock. Relief. Questions. Investors stood while cameras swung toward Danielle. Richard remained seated, staring at the red message as if someone had pulled the floor out from beneath him. The black woman he had tried to remove from his gala had just stopped millions of dollars from disappearing by reading the rules his own executives had ignored. Martin moved toward the exit. Security, Danielle said. Richard looked up. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The same guards who had escorted her toward the door earlier now stepped into Martin's path. He stopped. The reversal was so complete that even Emily covered her mouth. On what authority? Martin demanded. Danielle glanced at Richard. She could have answered for him. She did not. Richard slowly stood. His shoulders seemed heavier now. Mine! Martin laughed nervously. You are trusting her? Richard looked across the ballroom at Danielle. Every camera caught the answer before he spoke it. Shame. Recognition. And something close to disbelief at himself. I should have trusted her when she told me who she was. Martin's smile disappeared. Richard turned toward security. Do not let anyone access that laptop or leave with Foundation records until counsel and law enforcement review them. Martin's face hardened. You have no idea what she has done to you. Danielle stepped closer. Actually, I think I do. She held up her phone. Calvin needed Richard to humiliate me publicly. You needed the transfer to happen while everyone blamed him. And when the money vanished, the photograph would make it look like I came here threatening the Foundation. Martin said nothing. Danielle continued. But there was one mistake. The ballroom became silent again. You prepared the story before Richard removed me. Martin's eyes shifted. Barely. Danielle saw it. Which means whoever wrote that headline already knew exactly what Richard would do. Richard closed his eyes for half a second. That truth hurt more than the cameras. His prejudice had been predictable enough to become part of someone else's plan. When he opened his eyes, Danielle was no longer someone he was trying to control. She was the person holding the entire room together. Then the silver briefcase inside the elevator emitted a soft electronic chirp. Everyone turned. The Foundation access card on top went dark. The technician checked his monitor. Something just connected from the parking garage. Danielle's relief vanished. To what? His fingers moved quickly. Then stopped. The donor archive. Richard went pale. That contains every confidential donor record we have. A progress bar appeared on the giant screen. Exporting files. 21%. 34. 48. Martin smiled for the first time. Danielle looked at him. Calvin is still downstairs. Martin shook his head slowly. No, Dr. Brooks. The progress bar jumped to 63%. Calvin is not downstairs. Danielle's phone vibrated again. Another photograph appeared. This one had been taken seconds ago from somewhere inside the ballroom. It showed Danielle standing beside Richard. Beneath it were 6 words. You stopped the wrong transfer. Danielle slowly raised her eyes toward the hundreds of faces surrounding her. Somewhere among them, someone lowered a phone. You stopped the wrong transfer. Danielle read the message once, then lifted her eyes from the phone. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Calvin was watching. The donor archive climbed past 70%. Nobody spoke. Cold stage light reflected across hundreds of frozen faces while the ventilation system hummed beneath the floor. Then Danielle noticed something almost everyone else missed. The photograph. Richard looked at her. What about it? It was taken from behind us. She turned slowly toward the stage. That angle is not in the audience. The technician followed her gaze toward the production platform. 3 camera operators stood beneath the lighting rig. 1 chair was empty. A headset rested beside an open laptop. Who was there? Danielle asked. The coordinator went pale. Our live stream director. Name? Calvin Price. Richard's breath caught. The technician rushed to the abandoned station. The export is coming through this console. 82%. His fingers moved across the keyboard. I cannot stop it without killing the live stream network. Danielle looked toward the enormous screens, then toward the phones recording from every table. Then kill it. Richard stepped forward. That feed carries tonight's entire broadcast. Danielle met his eyes. An hour ago, he had valued appearances above truth. Now the same choice stood in front of him again. Do it, Richard said. The technician pulled the network connection. The screens went black. The mechanical hum beneath the stage died. The progress bar vanished at 87%. Silence hit the ballroom so completely that Danielle could hear someone exhale 20 feet away. Then footsteps struck the metal stairs behind the production platform. Calvin emerged from the shadows wearing a technician's jacket, his face no longer hidden behind distance or reflections. Guests recoiled as phones swung toward him. He stopped when security moved into the aisle. You destroyed your own gala, Calvin said to Richard. Richard stared at him. No. I almost destroyed it when I refused to listen to her. The words changed the room. Danielle felt every face turn toward her again. But this time there was no suspicion in their eyes. No amusement. No question about whether she belonged. Emily stood near the front table with tears shining beneath the cold lights. The older donors who had watched Danielle being escorted away now lowered their eyes. Richard walked toward the stage, then stopped several feet from Danielle. His voice came out quieter than anyone expected. I owe everyone here an explanation. He looked at Emily first. I accused an innocent employee because suspicion was easier than patience. Then he looked at Danielle. His jaw tightened as if the next words physically hurt. And I looked at Dr. Brooks and decided who she was before she had spoken 10 words to me. Camera phones remained raised. Richard could have blamed Calvin. He did not. Calvin exploited my judgment, he said. But he did not create it. Danielle's expression softened, not into forgiveness, but recognition. Richard turned toward the guests. What happened to Dr. Brooks tonight was not a misunderstanding. The room became painfully still. It was my failure. Emily covered her mouth. The coordinator lowered her headset. Even Calvin's expression shifted as the excuse he had built his plan around disappeared in public. Richard faced Danielle again. I am sorry. Danielle held his gaze. An apology matters. Richard waited. What happens after it matters more? He nodded slowly. No defense. No argument. Then Emily began clapping. One uncertain sound in a ballroom built for 400 people. Another person joined. Then another. Within seconds the room rose, not for Richard, but for Danielle. She did not smile triumphantly. She looked toward Emily first, then toward the employees standing along the walls, people who had spent the evening becoming invisible whenever wealthy guests passed. Danielle raised one hand, and the applause gradually stopped. Emily found the recording, she said. The technician stopped the transfer. People finally spoke when silence became easier. She looked across the room. Do not turn one person into a hero so everyone else can forget their responsibility. Richard lowered his eyes. The sentence landed harder than applause ever could. Security escorted Calvin away from the production area while Foundation Counsel preserved the equipment for investigators. Martin remained seated under supervision, staring at the dark screen. The crisis was finally slowing. Breathing softened. Glasses stopped trembling. The ballroom felt human again. Then Richard noticed the covered display behind the stage. The one Danielle had looked toward when he first humiliated her. "What is under there?" he asked. The coordinator hesitated. "It was supposed to be revealed before Dr. Brooks spoke." Danielle looked at the black fabric. For the first time all night, emotion broke through her composure. Her eyes glistened. Richard saw it. "What is it?" Danielle did not answer. The coordinator reached for the curtain control. Fabric whispered across metal. Slowly, the covering rose. Richard stared at what had been hidden behind him the entire evening. Then he looked at Danielle, and whatever words he had left disappeared. The black fabric rose without music. No spotlight moved. No one applauded. Behind it stood a 20-foot installation of hundreds of mirrored steel tiles, each engraved with a single name. Across the center, in quiet gold letters, were the words, "Human dignity has no status." Richard stared at the message, then at Danielle. Cold light slid across the metal and fractured his reflection into pieces. "You knew this was here?" he asked. Danielle nodded. "The Foundation asked me to dedicate it tonight." His eyes dropped. Less than 2 hours earlier, he had stood beneath those same words and decided she belonged at a service entrance. Around them, phones slowly lowered. The room no longer needed another recording. Richard walked toward the installation. Near the bottom was a smaller plaque honoring workers, advocates, teachers, caregivers, and employees whose contributions had gone unseen. Emily found her own reflection in the steel. So did the bartenders. The coat check attendant. The security guards who had followed Richard's order without asking Danielle's name. Nobody spoke. Richard turned toward one of those guards. "You did what I told you." The man stiffened. "Yes, sir. I should never have told you." Danielle watched Richard remove the Foundation access badge from his jacket. For years, that small piece of metal had opened private elevators, boardrooms, donor suites, places where his name arrived before he did. He placed it on the empty podium. "Tomorrow morning, I am asking the board for an independent review of every account Calvin and Martin touched." He paused. "And of my conduct tonight." A few donors exchanged glances. Richard did not look toward them for approval. "Until that review is complete, I am stepping away from the Foundation." The words settled quietly. No dramatic gasp. Just consequence. Danielle approached the podium. Richard stepped aside before she reached it. That small movement was almost invisible, but Emily noticed. So did everyone who remembered the velvet rope. Richard was no longer deciding whether Danielle belonged in the room. He was making room for her. Danielle looked at the speech waiting on the teleprompter. Then she switched it off. The screens went dark. "I had a speech," she said. A few exhausted smiles appeared. "I do not think we need it anymore." Her eyes moved across the employees along the walls, then the donors, then Richard. "Tonight showed us enough." She stepped away from the microphone. No lecture followed. No victory speech. Just silence. Then Emily approached her. "Dr. Brooks?" Danielle turned. Emily held out the cream invitation, now wrinkled and damp from the rain. Danielle had dropped it near the production table during the chaos. "You might want this." Danielle looked at the gold lettering, then smiled softly. "Keep it." Emily blinked. "Why?" Danielle glanced toward the stage. "So you remember you never needed one to deserve respect." Richard heard her. His eyes closed briefly. Not from humiliation now, but recognition. Hours later, the Grand Marlowe was nearly empty. Investigators had collected the equipment. Foundation attorneys had left with sealed records. Outside, Chicago rain had softened into mist. The chandeliers shut down one row at a time until only the installation remained illuminated. Danielle crossed the marble floor toward the exit. Her heels made the same quiet sound they had made when security escorted her out. But nobody followed her now. At the velvet rope, Richard was waiting. No entourage. No jacket. No billionaire armor. Dr. Brooks. She stopped. He looked toward the service corridor where he had told her to enter. I cannot undo tonight. No. Danielle's answer was gentle, but firm. Richard nodded. Then I will not ask you to pretend I can. For several seconds Heather spoke. Good night, Richard. Good night, Danielle. She walked toward the revolving doors. Richard remained behind. As Danielle reached them, she heard footsteps and glanced back. Richard had noticed Emily carrying a heavy box of glassware toward the service hallway. Without calling anyone, he crossed the empty ballroom, took one side of the box, and helped her carry it. Emily looked surprised. Richard said nothing. Neither did Danielle. She stepped outside. The rain had stopped. Early morning light was beginning to turn the wet pavement silver, and the city reflected in every dark window around her. Behind the glass, Richard and Emily passed beneath the installation together. For 1 second, their reflections appeared side by side among hundreds of engraved names. Danielle looked at them, then at her own reflection in the door. She did not need a stage anymore. She had never needed one. The door turned quietly behind her, and morning light filled the space where the velvet rope had been.